On the fateful night of April 15th, one ship was launched into worldwide fame for all the wrong reasons. Known as the Titanic, this unsinkable ship was going on its first luxury maiden voyage across the Atlantic Ocean, carrying over 2,240 passengers and crew. The hull was known as the largest movable man-made structure in the entire world, and over 100,000 people excitedly gathered to watch it set sail. Little did they know, the ship was doomed to sink beneath the icy depths a few days later. It all took place on a calm, moonless night. Everything was well until a lookout suddenly spotted an iceberg in the distance. The engines were quickly reversed, but it was already too late. They watched in sheer horror as it grazed the side of the ship, powerless to do anything. Yet they caught a breath of relief when no serious damage appeared to have occurred. What the crew and passengers did not yet know was that below the waterline, the iceberg had created a jagged 300-foot slash across the hull. By the time they realized, seawater had already entered over 5 compartments. At that moment, the captain knew the unsinkable ship was going to sink. What then followed was a period of intense panic and disorientation that would lead to failed procedures and moments of bravery and sacrifice. At the end of the night, only 705 people had survived. The rest of the 1,517 people had drowned and slipped under the freezing water's surface along with the ship. From then on, the location of the ship was a complete mystery at the time. It was not until 1985, nearly 74 years later, that the rusted corpse of the ship would finally see the light again. However, many mysteries about the ship still remained. Because it had become an international living legend, many haunting theories had emerged from the depths. So today, here at Unexplained Mysteries, we'll be shedding light on 3 of the most chilling mysteries involving the Titanic. Fire aboard the Titanic. You have just heard that the reason the Titanic sank was because of an iceberg. Well, what if that was not true at all? What if, in fact, the ship sank because of fire instead? This is exactly what one Irish investigative journalist called Sinan Maloney claims to have happened. After doing in-depth research for more than 30 years, he believed that a fire had caused the ship's hull to weaken. In other words, what could have been a small iceberg collision turned into a major disaster because of the damaged hull, along with criminal negligence. What had apparently taken place was that a fire, allegedly burning since the ship had launched from the Belfast shores, it smouldered on for 4 long days before it was put out, yet the damage had already been done. The once strong steel was now weakened and more brittle than ever, having been roasted by the heat that reached nearly 1,000 degrees Celsius. The iceberg was the tipping point that completely shredded the hull apart, letting the cold Atlantic waters inside. Maloney never believed that the 300-foot gash would have come from a small graze alone. In his documentary called Titanic: The New Evidence, he explains how the ship's hull had various dark and mysterious marks in several auctioned photographs. What were these marks? Apparently, no one had ever investigated them before. He claims that the fire was greatly downplayed at the time. No one even bothered to think that the fire could have been the whole root cause of the catastrophe that took place. Part of the reason why that might have happened was that Maloney speculated that people were too eager for the Titanic to launch. Because it had been delayed more than once, it was easier to overlook a small fire. However, Maloney believes that given the fire, the ship should have never set out to sea. Perhaps, if people had taken the time to study those marks and delayed the ship one more time, the maiden voyage would have been successful. However, it was human error and the hand of fate that played a cruel twist in the mystery of the Titanic. The prediction of the Titanic sinking. There is no question about it that hundreds of stories, books, and famous movies have resulted from this tragic event. In fact, you might have even watched or cried over several of them yourself. However, have you ever heard about the fictional stories written before disaster struck that seemingly predicted the event that would unfold? In an eerie twist of fate, two works crafted years before seemed to closely resemble what would happen aboard the Titanic. Yet stories about ocean liners were also popular at that time. Could it have been a mere coincidence? We will leave that for you to decide. Introducing the first work, called How the Mail Steamer Went Down in Mid-Atlantic by Survivor. It was penned by a spiritualist and investigative journalist named W.T. Stead in 1886. He told a tale of an unnamed ocean liner that sank in the Atlantic after colliding with a small sailing ship amid heavy fog. The main character was a sailor named Thompson who became concerned about the lifeboat shortage on deck. As soon as the ocean liner began to sink, women and children were first given priority. Panic would also take, which resulted in only 200 survivors out of the original 700 passengers. The author concludes with a haunting line. This is exactly what might take place and what will take place if the liners are sent to sea short of boats. The author in real life was convinced that he would end up dying from lynching or drowning. He ended up dying by the latter method, and on no other ship than the Titanic itself. Coincidence still? We think not. Yet, that is not the only fictional story that mysteriously resembles the Titanic. In a short novel called The Wreck of the Titan, or Futility, a ship called the Titan sails into the North Atlantic, hits an iceberg, and disastrously sinks. What is even more striking is how many connections and similarities there are between the design of the Titan and what the structure of the Titanic is like in real life. Were these authors somehow time travelers, prophets, fortune tellers, or was all this just a cruel coincidence? Whatever it may be, there is certainly no doubt that this haunting mystery will continue to live on. Haunted mirror up for auction. There are 3 ways that you can get to know more about the captain of the Titanic, named Edward John Smith. Because he went down with the ship, you, unfortunately, cannot sit down and have a chat with him. However, if you were a time traveller, you could go back and meet him. Another way is by doing a classic internet search to learn more about his life. The last method is by glancing into his mirror. Before the captain set sail, he had left one mirror on his dressing table. Perhaps it was the last mirror he had ever looked into before he left the shores. 110 years later, this antique now is deemed to be possessed by his ghost and was recently up for auction. The first spirit encounter was when his maid took the mirror back home and claimed she could see his face appear annually when it came to the Titanic's sinking anniversary. It was passed down in her family line until somehow ended up abandoned. Then, a man named David Smith found it and had it locked in a vault of his for over 5 years, accompanied by a small handwritten note about the mirror's ghostly past. Finally, the mirror left the vault and was put up for auction. It was a museum from Las Vegas that eventually won the bid, forking out over £2,800 for the rights to own it. Perhaps, if you are lucky, you might just be able to come across this mirror for yourself one day upon the next anniversary of the Titanic. As you gaze into the glass, do not expect to see your own reflection. You might just find yourself standing face to face with the ill-fated captain himself. But what do you make of these 3 different views, and which do you believe? Be sure to let us know your thoughts in the comment section below and help us by growing this community while working to solve these unexplained mysteries. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos.